What's up, guys? Welcome back to Newswave. So we did have a Nintendo Direct announcement. Unfortunately, for people looking for that big general Direct, not really the case here, but we do have a Direct to look forward to this week, and we're going to go over all of that here today. Also, we are going to be talking about Sony seemingly preparing their own series of announcements for next week that could culminate in their own State of Play presentation, and we're also going to talk about a really interesting video that showcases a PlayStation 5 being turned into a PS5 Slim. Guys, if you enjoy these videos, make sure you hit that like button, and if you're new here to the Spawnwave channel, make sure you are subscribed down below. And we're going to start today with Forza Motorsport. It was unveiled again, that being in the Xbox showcase most recently, but they really seem to focus in on the visuals, the environments, and ray tracing, which was an obvious shot at Gran Turismo 7 that only allows ray tracing to be in replays after you're done racing around the track. Well, in a live stream, they once again reiterated this, even going as far as say we're not misleading you. This over at The Gamer, quoting Turn 10 developers saying, "We're not trying to mislead you here. When you're racing and when you're playing the game, ray tracing is on. We want to be really clear about that." So it's interesting, so much talk about ray tracing to kick off this generation, and I guess it kind of makes sense if you think about what makes last gen different from this gen. Not as much the resolution any longer, because we had the Xbox One X and the PS4 Pro. Those both targeted 4K, didn't get there as often as you would have liked, and now we see these newer systems still also kind of struggling with 4K, but then you talk about ray tracing that adds new dynamic and the SSD with the load times, but I don't really know how, racing games already look really good, and I get you bring in ray tracing to help it get even further, but is it worth the performance hit that could potentially pop up? That's something we'll find out more about as we get closer to Forza Motorsport's release. Unfortunately, that's not till spring next year, and I'm sure Digital Foundry will be all over that when it comes out. Also, we did have that Aliens game that was unveiled during Summer Game Fest that turned out to be like an isometric top-down squad-based shooter. It wasn't really what the cinematic was showcasing, but I saw a lot of people wondering if we would get another Alien Isolation at some point after seeing that cinematic. Well, it does look like the developers behind Alien Isolation have been very busy. We can see this post up over on Games Radar. Alien Isolation's team has been working on a sci-fi FPS for 4 years, this from Creative Assembly. Now, in the most recent issue of Edge magazine, Creative Assembly actually shared quite a bit of information around this game, going on to say it's our new IP and it's a world that we're creating, and of course, we're wringing our hands over it, and we really want to get that right. This from Chief Product Officer Rob Bartholomew, who adds, "We want to understand what authenticity in a blue ocean or an open sky looks like when you've got a blank page in front of you." And I am very curious where they would be going with this, because Alien Isolation was a really cool take on just that overall universe, not necessarily having you mow down a bunch of xenomorphs or whatever aliens in front of you, but a more personal experience where you were the prey the entire time, running away from just a single entity, and it was just a very tense game all the way through. I'm curious what they would do here with a sci-fi FPS, if they would stick to a more tense situation or go in the direction of a more action-oriented horde-style game, but the idea of them, I guess, getting to their own brand new IP, whatever they want, it's certainly something to keep an eye on here, especially after 4 years of development. Oh, and we had talked about the Dragon's Dogma 2 announcement. People were very excited to hear that, yes, it is happening. In fact, they were so excited, they went back to the Dragon's Dogma Dark Arisen game on Steam, which you can see this. This was quoted up by Benji Sales, pointing out that Dragon's Dogma hit its highest peak concurrent player count on Steam in over 6 years, showing what looks like over 6,500 concurrent players, that over a 24-hour peak. That's pretty big, obviously showing that people are, well, going back to Dragon's Dogma, yes, but maybe even checking it out for the first time after seeing the announcement for a sequel. And Capcom, come on, you gotta do a patch for this game, just something to help it out with current builds now that could get more out of this game, especially if you look at the Series X, or even the Series S or the PS5, those games are still locked at 30, and apparently when the team at Xbox was looking into FPS boost, they ran into issues trying to push that game up in terms of frame rate. So like Capcom, come on, go back, patch that game, have these newer systems be able to take advantage of the additional power they have, and then we can kind of hang out, play the game for years until Dragon's Dogma 2 eventually releases. And guys, with some of the quick news out of the way, let's get into the bigger stuff. Let's start right away with a Nintendo Direct that will be taking place tomorrow. We can see this over on Nintendo of America. It says tune in on June 22nd, 7 a.m. Pacific time, that's 10 a.m. Eastern, for a live-streamed Xenoblade Chronicles 3 Direct presentation featuring roughly 20 minutes of information about the upcoming RPG adventure for the Nintendo Switch. And this game coming out a little more than a month from now, that being July 29th. And I do think this makes sense. I saw some people say, well, we've seen a lot of Twitter reveals where they put out a video showcasing characters, landscapes, even like just still images of the different world parts. And I still look at this and say they got to go over the battle system quite heavily, because that's the one part about Xenoblade that I see people talk about putting them off from the game. And that's something that I think Monolith is probably at least mindful of. It's like, hey, this is a very intricate system that we would like to have more time focused on and really get all the focus at that point if you're a direct like this for 20 minutes. Whereas let's say this was just part of like the general direct, they're not going to get 20 minutes of the general direct. It just wouldn't work out. So I think it's a better idea to do it this way. And then if you do have your full general direct still happening next week, you won't even really have to have Xenoblade in there at all. Which of course leads into the idea of, oh, that's it. There's not going to be a general direct now. And you might be right. I mean, after Xenoblade Chronicles 3 Direct, Nintendo might just shut down as a company, and that'll be that. Now, I look at this as a good idea from Nintendo's point of view in terms of getting more eyes on Xenoblade Chronicles 3, as that's obviously gearing up to be one of their big releases for the second half of this year to go alongside of Splatoon 3, Pokemon, and I guess Bayonetta, and whatever else they have for us that will probably be shown in that Direct that still seems like it's being rumored and would still be happening next week. I don't think this announcement negates that. But I will say Nintendo probably could have gone in a different order here, because people just seem annoyed at Xenoblade now for just existing as a Direct. Nintendo could have probably done the general Direct first and then done Xenoblade 3's Direct. But I also understand then you're kind of getting close to that release date. I mean, that's their next big release, right? At the end of July. I know Fire Emblem Three Hopes is this week, but like in the grand scheme of things for what they are marketing towards in the short term, that's it. And they probably don't want to do it 2 or 3 weeks out from release. Even this is kind of cutting it close for them. So it'll be interesting to learn more about the battle system. They have like their Dragon Ball Z fusion twist on the whole thing. So I don't know, we'll see what they have for us. Make sure you check that one out, especially Xenoblade fans, obviously, that being tomorrow, 7 a.m. Pacific, 10 a.m. Eastern time. Next up, let's talk about Sony and how next week could end up being a very busy time for games if Nintendo has something, and maybe even Sony with a state of play. Well, let's take a look at where this started up again yesterday. This from Tom Henderson. Evidence of a state of play next week. Gran Turismo producer says an update on the game next week. Jason Schreier says God of War Ragnarok release date later this month. And Sony is set to reveal some hardware next week. Now, on the hardware front, it does kind of look like something's happening here with Sony, because over on 91mobiles.com, they have the exclusive Sony InZone H9, H7, and H3 gaming headsets revealed, all three to feature spatial sound. Remember, we heard that they were going to have a line of accessories to show off here by the end of this month. This appears to be part of that, with the other part potentially being like a more expensive DualSense or a Pro controller for the PS5. But they say Sony will soon debut its InZone H series headphones. The series includes their H3, H7, H9, and all three headphones come with 360 spatial sound for gaming. And it definitely has that PS5 aesthetic to it, right? The two-tone color design with the hint of blue there. And it also appears to have like a dongle so you can plug it into your PC, or I guess even, I would assume your PlayStation 5. It would be weird if Sony developed these kind of headphones. They looked very similar to a PS5, but it didn't work for them. I assume these are more expensive headphones, or at least the higher end model would be, than the current headphones that Sony has released for their PlayStation 5. Okay, so it looks like new hardware of some kind, accessories, is coming up here pretty soon with just images of the headphones floating around already. Now we have the Gran Turismo update coming up, but the thing with this one, Gran Turismo, they'll just do updates whenever. Like, they'll announce it. It doesn't go alongside of event necessarily, as they do a lot of fine tuning and tweaking with this game pretty consistently. So I don't know if I would look at that update as like it's definitely being shown in a state of play. However, God of War Ragnarok still doesn't have a release date. And based on Jason Schreier's reporting, we would be seeing that release date here pretty soon. And what I believe is going to happen, Sony will unveil the hardware that's being rumored in a couple of press releases, blog posts, specifically I'm sure about that Pro controller that, I will tell you this, continues to pick up momentum behind the scenes now when it comes to rumors and all of this for that. So I do kind of think that's happening. The Gran Turismo update, that'll just go out, like, once again, blog post. God of War Ragnarok will probably get its own, like, state of play, similar to what we've seen with Ghostwire Tokyo, Hogwarts Legacy, and others, and they hit us with that release date, and it comes out apparently in, like, November. So either way, I think next week is going to be a pretty busy time in games. Nintendo most likely will be pretty active, and yeah, it also looks like Sony will be right there with them. Next up, let's talk about an awesome video that a lot of people sent me, and it is a very fascinating thing to watch happen from start to finish, and that is a PlayStation 5 being turned into a PS5 Slim. I'll leave this video linked down below in the sources, and make sure you check it out, because some of the ideas that he comes up with to get it done is pretty impressive. But essentially, we have DIY Perks take a PS5, which he's done work with a PS5 in the past where he made like a stealth PS5, but in this case, he was trying to shrink down the form factor to fall more in line with what we've seen from previous iterations from Sony, where they take the PS2 and turn it into a PS2 Slim, which I actually went over how they did that in a video before, and then the PS3 getting its PS3 Slim, and so on there. But some of the stuff that he had to go through to get it to what it looked like 2 centimeters was things like remove the power supply, have that be external, and even install an entire custom water block, cooling solution. And it's not exactly something that Sony is going to jump out of their chair to go and do right away, because it was very costly. I mean, the amount of copper that he had to put into this system was it's pretty expensive. As he said, it's like the same price as the system itself, and we've seen Sony go in the opposite direction, where they've worked to re-engineer the PS5 in order to remove copper from it. I think the part that's the most interesting about this is he's been able to show how low profile the PS5 can be if you remove the heatsink and the power supply. It can get pretty small, which we've talked about how the motherboard itself in these different systems is actually a pretty small footprint in the grand scheme of things. I would have been curious to see what his solution would have been if he had the disk drive version, which he obviously picked the digital version because that's one less thing to try to figure out, and that would have been, I'm sure, a whole situation on its own there. But I do believe that Sony will eventually create a PlayStation 5 Slim. If nothing else, history tells us that. Really what they'll have to do though is lower the overall power draw for the PS5, because it can suck quite a bit of power when it's really moving along. So their work with AMD, where they will be shrinking down the chip, the fabrication of it, make these chips more efficient, will allow them to do things like shrink down the heatsink, which is a massive footprint, and maybe even take the power supply and make it external, which is stuff they've done in the past. It's probably just going to be still a couple of years before that happens. We're just trying to find PS5 systems as it is. But if they can at least shrink down the PS5 somewhat, slim it down so that when you set it up for the first time in Entertainment Center, it doesn't like it wants to just go right through it and collapse the whole thing. And in our last bit of news, let's talk about the Steam summer sale that I'm sure most of us need to look through, since I'm sure we've all cleared out our backlog by now. Right, well anyway, this week it will be kicking off. There's actually a video that was posted up that was pretty well done that went over some of the highlights, not necessarily how much money would be saved from these games, but the fact that these games will be taking part in it, and actually there's some pretty good ones. Now, this sale will kick off June 23rd 10 a.m. Pacific. It will run until July 7th, all right? And looking down the list here, Ghostwire Tokyo, Final Fantasy 14 Online, The Elder Scrolls Online, Cyberpunk 2077, The Sims 4, Sid Meier's Civilization 6, Forza Horizon 5, Rust, Tom Clancy's Rainbow Six Siege, Raft, Dead by Daylight, God of War, there we go, Destiny 2, Core Keeper, Ark Survival, Evolve, FIFA 22, Dying Light 2, WWE 2K22, some newer games in there, Red Dead Redemption 2, Grand Theft Auto 5, and even Lego Star Wars, The Skywalker Saga. So actually quite a bit of stuff in here, and you just want to keep an eye on, of course, the Steam front page for the application. When this all happens, you'll be able to look through to see what kind of discounts are being offered here. But just wanted to give you a heads up on some of the games, just in case you were looking to buy them in the next day or two. Might want to hold off for when this sale goes live and save yourself some money. And before we go to the comment of the day, we're going to take a look at the poll that I posted up yesterday. We're asked, have you played any of the Xenoblade games before? 57% said no, 43% said yes. You know, that's more yeses than I was expecting here. I mean, if you look at Xenoblade Chronicles overall in terms of sales, it's not like explosive sales or anything. It's still millions of copies, but not like tens of millions. So I think there's still a pretty large audience out there that Nintendo can grab for this series and kind of bring them in. And I'm going to be curious to see how they talk about Xenoblade Chronicles 3 leading up to its release, as they're working to, of course, sell more copies than Xenoblade Chronicles 2, which I believe was in the realm of 2 to 2.5 million sold. I'm looking at 3 as being a big jumping off point for the Xenoblade series. I mean, 3-4 million, I don't think that's out of the question or anything there. I know JRPGs in particular do have a hard time breaking into those mainstream numbers of like 10 million plus, but I think Xenoblade Chronicles 3 is set up pretty nicely here heading into July. And we'll finish up with the comment of the day, as you're seeing here. This is from Kazuka saying, would be awesome to see Mischief Makers revived. It was such a unique game with so many characters with wacky personalities. If not a new release, perhaps we add it to the N64 library for Switch Online. It's been a long time since I heard anyone say Mischief Makers before, right? And it's kind of cool to see Treasure mention, oh, there's a highly requested game that we're gonna do, or like a new game, I guess, in the series. Mischief Makers was interesting on the Nintendo 64 because that was the time where everything was going to 3D. Doesn't matter if it was a good idea or not, it's going to 3D, right? And Mischief Makers like, nah, we're gonna do a 2.5D game, and it was much different than anything else around it, but still kind of fun to play through, and I think still worth playing now. It just hasn't really been released anywhere else, I think, other than just having the cartridge. So at the very least, I think that'd be a good addition to the Nintendo 64 expansion pack. And at this point, I wouldn't be shocked if it happened here, maybe even before the end of this year. And ladies and gentlemen, that's going to do it here for Newswave. If you enjoyed this video, guys, hit that like button. If not, hit the dislike. Leave comments down below about everything we talked about here. Today was the Nintendo Direct. Got some Xenoblade to look forward to this week, but do you think that means there's no Nintendo Direct next week to end out the month of June? And then also, what about Sony's plans for next week? Some new hardware, maybe finally that God of War release date. Thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.